Friday practice at Silverstone is over and the fastest driver of the day was Lando Norris in the Mclaren, but Ferrari are right on his heels. But what did we learn today? Well, I am going to be taking a look at the data and doing a data analysis from Friday practice. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now though, let's get into the video. As usual, I'll be talking about the top teams later on, so please do stick around for that. Yep, Friday is over at Silverstone, and it was the hottest and driest day of the week before rain is expected on Saturday and potentially on Sunday as well, which could mean that practice was a bit pointless today. But even so, it was Lando Norris who was fastest, but Ferrari are right there, and I will be talking about that more later on when we are talking about Ferrari and McLaren, so please do stick around for that. During practice today, we saw how wind affected the drivers, as we saw some spins at Copse Corner, and also Carlos Sainz had a spin on the exit of Midfield Corner. But how did it affect the times? Well, let's compare the fastest lap from FP1, which was set by Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari, and let's compare it to the fastest lap from FP2, which was set by Lando Norris, of course. And when you take a look at these two laps, you can see that there is a massive amount of circuit cleanup and evolution from FP1 to FP2, especially when they go through turns 6 and 7, which is Brooklands and Luffield. You can see that Norris in FP2 with a cleaner circuit and a better setup and a more dialed in track carries around 12 kilometers per hour more speed, which is quite a lot and shows the real difference between the sessions. The other area where you can really see how much faster the cars are in FP2 is at Stowe Corner, which is turn 15. Through there, Norris carries 13 kilometers per hour more speed, showing how the soft tyres are actually hanging on for a lapse, despite being a step softer this year from last year. Also, we can see that, as usual, higher top speeds down the straights due to the teams having the power units turned up just a little bit more for FP2 compared to FP1. Altogether, there is a 1 second gap between the fastest time from FP1 to the fastest time from FP2. So we have seen how the times changed from FP1 to FP2, but now let's take a look at the top speeds that the teams are able to reach, so we can see who is looking fast down the straight and who's looking a little bit slower at the moment. And when it comes to the fastest car in a straight line, by quite some distance it has to be said, was the Red Bull of Max Verstappen, as he was able to clock a top speed of 325 kilometers per hour, which will be down to potentially using a little bit more engine mode on the push lap, or it could be that Red Bull are trying to run with a little bit less downforce, which could explain some of their understeering issues, which we will be talking about later on when I do talk about Red Bull. In general though, the majority of teams are reaching around 320 kilometers per hour, which is approximately 200 miles per hour, apart from Ferrari, who managed to hit 323 kilometers per hour. In the midfield then, let's talk about Racing Bulls and Aston Martin. So far today, after Friday, it looks like the midfield will be headed by either Racing Bulls or Aston Martin, as both teams seem to have a bit of an advantage over the rest of the midfield currently. All through FP1 and FP2, Isaac Hadjar and Liam Lawson were mixing it with the top drivers, showing that they do have some very solid pace at the moment. But also, Aston Martin were getting into the mix a little bit, as Lance Stroll was the 7th fastest driver of the day, even faster than Mercedes' Kimi Antonelli. Let's compare then the fastest lap of Lance Stroll to Isaac Hadjar to see how Lance edged out Isaac. And when you take a look at these two laps, it's actually very interesting because their times are pretty similar, but the way they go about these times are very different. It looks like going through the medium and higher speed corners, Stroll and Aston Martin has the advantage. But when it comes to the braking zones, Hadjar closes the gap back up, showing that the Racing Bulls looks to be a little bit more balanced on the brakes so far, which is quite interesting. And it does mean that things are going to be very interesting when it comes to qualifying, especially when it comes to two teams who generate their lap times by different measures, especially if it is going to be wet. If it is wet, you are going to want to have that balance on the brakes, which Racing Bulls does seem to have at the moment. I just want to say, if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now though, let's get back to the video and let's talk about Red Bull. For Red Bull then, it has not been the greatest of first days at the circuit for them. Neither Max Verstappen or Yuki Tsunoda have looked particularly comfortable with the car. Red Bull has been very understeery so far this weekend, especially for Max Verstappen, and we could see multiple times that his car was just not turning. It looked lazy, and because of that, Red Bull have some real work to do overnight to dial out the understeer and make the car look just a little bit more lively. Verstappen's fastest time was half a second off of Lando Norris, so let's compare their fastest laps. And when you take a look at these two laps, it starts off pretty close between Norris and Verstappen. However, the area where Max loses out a chunk of time to Norris is going through Luffield and Brooklands. On the exit turn 7, Norris gets on the throttle a lot sooner, which would make sense, especially if Max has been struggling with understeer at low speed, which it does look like he has been, and from there it is advantage Lando Norris. But I do want to note something which I did find quite interesting, which is that through Maggots and Beckett's, Verstappen does carry more speed than Lando Norris, despite his understeer issues at slower speeds, which kind of does make sense with Max Verstappen, because typically when the speed does get higher and it comes to high speed downforce, Verstappen is the one who is the most committed of any drivers. But even so, Verstappen and Red Bull have work to do overnight if they want to close the half a second gap to McLaren. For Mercedes then, today was not particularly a great day. The car was not looking very fast, to be honest, with Antonelli half a second off of Norris, and George Russell was 7/10 away from Norris and was the 8th fastest driver of the day. In the race runs, honestly, things don't really look a great deal better either, which is what you can see here when you compare the long runs of Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari to George Russell in the Mercedes. And when you take a look at these two longer runs, it looks as though Mercedes are at a bit of a disadvantage compared to Ferrari. Now, it could be that they did it with more fuel, but when you consider how far they were away when it came to one lap pace as well, I think there is more that Mercedes are currently lacking. The pace is just not there when compared to Ferrari and also McLaren. With that in mind, unless they can improve, I have a feeling it could be a bit of a lonely race for the Silver Arrows this weekend. They might be able to mix it with Max if Max is still struggling, but if not, then they are just going to be on their own during the race. That is, of course, if it is dry. For Ferrari then, this was frankly a fantastic day. They are looking very positive after Friday, and maybe I just need to stop talking them up. Usually when I do talk them up a little bit, things do go wrong. But when I maybe suggest that they might not be so strong, they surprise us, as Charles Leclerc was the 2nd fastest driver of the day, and Lewis Hamilton was the 3rd fastest driver of the day, and both drivers set their laps on the 2nd push lap, showing that they are keeping the tyres alive for 2 push laps, which is going to be very important for qualifying if it is dry. Not only that, but their race pace was looking pretty handy as well. Let's now compare the long runs of Leclerc to Lando Norris, so we can see how things are looking for the race between the two teams, who look like they will be the ones fighting at the top of the field. And when you take a look at these two long runs, firstly, Leclerc does start the long run first and does a few more laps before Norris gets involved. But when you are comparing their runs like for like, in general, Lando Norris is about 0.2 of a second faster than Charles Leclerc, which, to be honest, based on how the rest of the season has been so far, is pretty good for Ferrari, and that 0.2 could be explained by the fact that Leclerc started his race runs a little bit sooner than Lando Norris. And if that is the case, then Ferrari could very much be in the mix this weekend in both qualifying and the race. That is, of course, if it is dry. If it does actually rain for either qualifying or the Grand Prix, then we're going to need to see Ferrari actually get the strategy right, which, as we all know, is not typically their strong point. But if they do get it right, and they do have the pace, then we could potentially see one or even both Ferrari drivers on the podium at the British Grand Prix. And finally for McLaren then, it was Lando Norris who was the fastest driver of the day by over 0.2 of a second from the two Ferrari cars. And if this is how the rest of the weekend goes, then we will see Lando Norris retaking the lead of the Drivers' World Championship. That being said, there is still a long way to go and plenty of time for Oscar Piastri to close the gap back to his teammates, but he is currently over 0.4 away over one lap. For now though, let's compare the fastest lap of Lando Norris and compare it to the fastest lap set by Charles Leclerc. And when we take a look at these two laps, in general they are pretty close, but the areas where Charles Leclerc loses out is at the loop at turn 4, and also like Verstappen at the exit of Brooklands at turn 7. Norris just gets fantastic traction, which is a characteristic of the McLaren. As the lap continues though, Leclerc does gain back some time, which is pretty interesting given he set his lap on the second push lap, not the first push lap. So the soft tyres do look like they could be good for 2 push laps, which will be interesting and useful information, once again, if qualifying is dry. So with that in mind then, what are my predictions for the top 5 in qualifying for the British Grand Prix? Well, in P5, I'm going to go for Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. P4 will be Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari. P3 will be Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. P2 will be Charles Leclerc, and Lando Norris will be on pole position for the British Grand Prix. That is, if qualifying is dry. But those are my thoughts. The question is, what do you guys think will happen? In the comment section down below, please do let me know. And as always, comment, leave a like and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.